class. So I'm going to read the bio for Bradley here, and then we are going to kick it off. I thought, what better today than have someone who's started one, and what is it like to actually create a DAO? So Bradley has an extensive business development and leadership experience in commercial real estate sector. In addition to working with facilities and real estate executives internationally, he works daily with Fortune 100 clients and C-suite executive leadership to overcome sustainability and engineering challenges pertaining to some of the most recognizable trophy assets in North America. And he created the company Park DAO, which I thought was very fascinating. So welcome, Bradley.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I appreciate being with your audience here and talking more about Park DAO and some of the challenges and what it's like to create a DAO. It's been an interesting path so far.
Hey, and by the way, you have nice plants behind you. I hope you see
my wife gets most of the credit there, I must admit.
Yeah, Bradley, really nice meeting you. Can you tell us what made you decide to create a Park DAO?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd say it's definitely been a journey. There's not one thing that leads you to making a decision like creating a decentralized organization, I'd say. But for me personally, it probably starts in the 8 years of investing in cryptocurrency that I've had. And my really just a fascination with blockchain and many of the things that have spurred and all the technologies that have come from that over the past decade, right? Most importantly, smart contracts and the idea that we can portray ownership on the blockchain, through smart contracts, through things like Ethereum and all the other solutions that we have out there. So, with that personal interest for a long time and investing background, coupled with kind of my, obviously as Daniel shared there, my background in commercial real estate, specifically my day-to-day job, I always had a personal interest in real estate investing. And to be honest with you, kind of a grudge against the way the system's currently laid out, right? I mean, you look at the barriers that currently exist to owning real estate, and it's endless. Things like, credit approval and mortgage writers, lenders, real estate agents, you name it. There's a litany of barriers to being a real estate owner, but then even more importantly, down payments, right? Having the actual assets to be able to own an entire house or parking lot in our instance. And it kind of irritated me. And then you think about things like investor status, right? In needing to be a qualified investor to privately invest in certain assets, certain securities. It seems always to me that it's been a separation from wealth and poor. And with that in mind, I've always thought of the idea, why can't me and some friends buy a piece of real estate, right? Why can't we participate in the real estate investor market on a smaller scale? And originally, I think the idea for us was thoughts like, hey, why don't we buy a vacation rental? Why don't we collectively buy an Airbnb or VRBO and see where that goes? But when you start thinking about the logistics of it, there's really two barriers that have always existed from me starting a DAO up until this point, which is first and foremost legal protection, right? If I owned a house, as an example, with 500 other people, what happens if someone slips and falls on our porch? What happens if someone destroys our living room, right? Who's held responsible? In a DAO, it's hazy. It's very hazy. And a lot of these DAOs that are started now, those are going to be questions that have to be answered down the line. Very challenging questions, and they're going to be costly too, right? It actually, if anything, it creates a risk point for a lot of the DAOs that exist now that don't have any sort of legal protection. And it's always been the prohibiting factor from me wanting to explore the idea of asset ownership by way of DAO. And then the other big prohibiting factor is really the complications of owning an asset, right? I mentioned, someone rents a rental house. Who's going to clean it? Who's going to make repairs? Who's going to meet the vendor, perhaps to exchange keys, et cetera? It's a little bit of a complex business, so to speak, to run decentralized without at least some inputs on a day-to-day basis. So those are kind of
the Bradley. Let me ask you in that one. I don't mean to cut you off. So I love that question that you posed, because if you're an investor and you're part of the DAO, something happened legally. If that, the judge, there's no one gets sued yet, right? As a member and as an investor, you're actually not protected. You're liable to what happened to whatever it may be. So that's actually scary for entrepreneurs point of view and an investor. Like it's the scary stuff. Like, why would I put myself out there? And if something happened, I'll be liable. So why is this attractive going to be work towards investors' side? I mean, there's only 2 states that's currently embracing, like Wyoming and what's the other one, Vermont. But majority of the states in the U.S., it's not recognized. It's scary stuff.
It certainly is, and honestly, that's what prevented me from doing it, and to your point, Kate, when you talk about these organizations, we're not just members, we are owners. We're owners in these organizations. And we start talking about DAOs being translated into the physical world, i.e. physical asset ownership, right? Then you start posing real physical liability for those that are interacting with your physical asset. And to your point, these owners, these token holders, are actually owners of those assets. They're not just participants. They're not just day traders, right? Like an Ethereum or a Bitcoin token. They're owners. And that means that when something happens, those owners need to be held responsible. Someone's got to pay those medical bills, right? And that's the reality of the world we live in. So how does the protection from owners work? That's why when the LLC, to your point, when Wyoming made the distinction that they'll fully protect the DAO as a legal limited liability corporation, my business background, instantly thought, okay, there's my protection, right? There's my organization's protection and a clear dotted line between personal responsibility and organizational responsibility, right? So the interesting, you can start thinking about an LLC and some of the legal protections they have and some of the legal advantages that an LLC has, right? Bank accounts, the ability to establish credit, obviously legal representation separate from a personal entity, all sorts of things that don't exist unless you're legally incorporated. And that doesn't matter so much if you're doing NFTs that are art, digital art, right? There's not a lot of liability in a digital asset as so much as physical assets. When you start translating the digital to the physical, that's when you get other people interacting with it, and that's when those liabilities start to come up. So that, along with the low maintenance of a parking lot inherently, right? You can have automatic gates, you can have remote security monitoring, you can have automatic triggers of when to snowplow based on the amount of snow accumulation. So very few things need to be managed in a parking lot, and inherently then it works really well for the idea of an autonomously run organization, right? Our members can make very simple decisions about how to operate a parking lot, not things like, hey, another renter trashed the bathroom, we need to buy a toilet, what type of toilet do you guys want to buy? Like those are decisions that are way too complex and way too time consuming. And we need simple organizations if we're going to have a proof concept of DAOs working. And that's what we're starting with, is something simple that with simple assets that can be run and makes a lot of sense.
All right. So we have a lot of listeners here from being exposed to DAO, have no clue about a DAO. Can you tell everyone your simple definition of a DAO, Bradley?
Sure. To me, the key in the term is really the autonomous organization, and I guess all of it's really incorporated, right? When you look at our application, at least, right? The foundation of Park DAO is the idea of removing the 1%, one person who owns entire assets, right? We want to decentralize that. Why do I have to go park in Chicago and pay $20 each day I do it to one person? Why can I not have it? Why can't I personally have a stake in that? And my friends have a stake in it. So that $20 is at least going to an investment that I have. It's not possible right now. We want to change that, right? So that decentralization is the first piece. Very important for us. We want to remove the power from the 1%. We want to decentralize and empower the working class and the end user. The autonomous piece I already touched on really with the parking lot. I think as we go, it's going to be the most important piece of DAOs. Do you have the right application? Are you running a business that has a lot of nuances that requires day-to-day decisions? Or are you running something that's simple, like a parking lot? People park in it, they use your gate. Might be a broken gate once every couple of years. That's easy enough to figure out, right? And then obviously the last piece, the organization. That speaks for itself. Where a lot of these, it's funny, an organization to me means it has some sort of legal protection, right? The LLC discussion again, but a lot of these organizations, so to speak, are really more of community and clubs, which is fine. I think there's benefit to all DAOs, and I think that we need to explore the space a lot. But a lot of them are more clubs organizations to me, I think. And that definition of organization seems to be changing day to day. But to me, an organization is something that has a little bit of legal protection and separated from the members. So I don't think that the term applies to all decentralized autonomous groups, if you will. But DAO has been a ubiquitous term that I think it really, that's my definition. I hope that answers your question, Kate.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you're creating, you mentioned, I've read a little bit of conversation between you, Dan, and yourself, and you tend to go for, I mean, it's very complex to get funding when you're entering into a very complex business model that's no one really execute well. I could just imagine, it's even harder to get funding when it's so simple, how much more a complex business model. Injecting down smart contract when probably was like, what the heck are you talking about? Are we in the same world? No, take me back when you create your own DAO, creating your smart contract. What is it like, as there's no model out there to how are you going to put it from start to execution? I mean, and that's got to be a headache with no blueprints somewhere.
Yeah, I would be lying if I didn't agree with you wholeheartedly, Kate. No question. I am not a technical person, right? Daniel read my background. I'm in commercial real estate. I handle trophy assets. I don't do coding, but one important thing, and I think your intro, Daniel, really touched on this well, is the challenges of starting a DAO. The biggest challenge is finding people who are willing to lend their resources, right? So granted, we could get a community of 1,000 investors. And between those 1,000 investors, undoubtedly, one of them's could program, could write code. One of them might have security expertise. One of them might be able to, design a parking lot, et cetera, right? But why are they incentivized to use those skill sets to benefit the mutual community, right? There's got to be some sort of opportunity for them to plug in, right, and take on ownership themselves. Which that doesn't happen until you create a larger community where there's actually something to plug your time into. So at the ground level where we are still and really building our community, it requires outsourcing, obviously. And honestly, the community, what we found is that the end products are, prolific. You can go on Twitter and see people advertising DAOs everywhere. The development side, the programming side, and some of the tools to get there are not quite as developed yet, right? So, you have to. A lot of it has been us finding people that have solutions to make someone like me a little bit easier to write a smart contract. And we're partnering with one new startup that is, as an example, it takes the complications in the code that are writing a smart contract and has an interface built on the front of it to make it a little bit, easier to interact with. And for instance, our intent and what we've done is to establish more of a base, because depending on how familiar you are with the Wyoming LLC requirements, right? It is a requirement to have a smart contract in place, a signifier. And what we're doing is basically, it requires a little bit of explanation, I guess. We're trying to make it simple to start. We want to get something on the blockchain and be compliant with it from our legal status. That's first and foremost. But the big pillar of our organization is transparency and democratization. So when you talk about how we're going to implement the specifics of the smart contract, we want to really lean on the community and have discussions around that, right? And we do that through our Discord. We do that through our social medias that we can connect with. But that's really the intent, is to have discussions about what we think a distribution is, and that goes into things like tokenomics, right? Future parking lot incentivizations, right? There's obviously there's a community fund if in case there is an issue. We're going to have to deal with how we work with our bank account, and there's a litany of decisions to be made, to your point, Kate. And I think in our instance, we're starting simple. We're working where we need to, and we're moving slow and making sure we do the right thing. And a lot of that is because we want input from the people that are invested in this. We want input from the people that are committed to being a part of ParkDAO. Because I'm not a CEO. That's one thing that it's interesting when I have these conversations, right? I'm not a CEO of anything. I don't own ParkDAO. I'm the founder, and I'm working with a group of other people to bring it off the ground. But ultimately, I don't want to be held responsible for all the decisions. I want us to collectively make as many as we can. So in our instance, that from the technical standpoint, it's challenging. We're going to need to outsource specifically to answer your question. But to get solutions up and to be legal, we're trying to be legally compliant. We're starting with vendors or developers that are willing to help us as much as they can. And one thing that we've been upfront about is, and we've had discussions with some solutions, I guess, in the DAO community, a lot of people are asking for free work. And to me, that aligns with a poor business model. We're not in this, we're trying to create a real sustainable business, and people don't work for free, and anyone who's worth their salt isn't working for free. So we're trying to find people that are talented and maybe understand that we're going to grow with them, and but still understanding that there's a cost, right? There's a real cost to hiring these highly technical people. And so it's a combination of things: working with recruiting agencies to try and find developers that can do peer review. We're working with this top layer solution where we can get our DAO up almost in-house, for the intermittent time period. And then long-term, we'll have to obviously work with developers to incorporate the decisions of our community into the finalized smart contract, if you will. And that's really going to be all in the roadmap that we're kind of finalizing now. But once, essentially for our purposes, we'll have that fully developed smart contract with the input of our community, basically published right before we go to the formal token sale or deed sale, if you will. And that's kind of the idea, to get as much input as we can, make sure we're doing it the way that people want it to.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And what are some of the learnings along the way? I know it's very difficult. You just hit it out, and I know you're trying to launch a token. I mean, that's normally, number 4 steps. You create a smart contract, you create governance structures and raise capital to launch, and then drop a coin. Is that
Right.
the steps that you're heading towards, Bradley?
We're heading towards there, sure, but it's a long road. Truthfully, Kate, I like right now. The first and foremost was to establish the legal protection for our community, which is the LLC, and that now that that's in place, it's really trying to build awareness. Because what I found in this industry is people like to start up fast and fail fast. And you look at examples like people aiming, honestly, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think the biggest contributor is people aiming too high, too early. I love the idea of buying a blimp or buying a football team or buying the Constitution. It's all very cool. But what happens when that doesn't happen, right? It's a failed organization. Someone's investing a lot of time and money and resources into building those organizations and ultimately failing fast, right? We realize that there's an opportunity to crawl before we walk before we run, and then eventually, build this organization bigger. And what I mean specifically by that is we're not going out trying to raise $50 million and buy 50 parking lots up front. Sure, if we raise $50 million, we'll talk as a community if that's what we want to buy and how we want to use that. But up front, we want to buy one parking lot. Prove that you can put real estate on the blockchain. Prove that micro deeds are real and that we can autonomously run a parking lot. And once we do that, our members will be incentivized. They'll receive benefits as we move into parking lot 2, right, and do that equity raise, and then parking lot 3, 4, 500. So in terms of the roadmap, the fail fast part is important because you need to build a community of people that actually believe in what we're doing before we go out and try and sell tokens, right? If we do a token raise and no one knows what we're doing or cares, we're just going to fail fast like everyone else. But if we have a long period of time informing people, like joining your guys' club here and getting the opportunity to tell people about ParkDAO and building a social media push, engaging with other DAO community members and building kind of organic interest in what we're doing, then ultimately we'll have a community base who can do things like I mentioned before, have input on the way the smart contract's structured, go to market in a way that's meaningful because we have invested people that are interested in it, right? And then have that token raise, as you mentioned, that equity raise. And then ultimately, based on that equity raise, we'll distribute the micro deed NFTs. And from that NFT distribution, then we'll have actual governance, right? Those people that have that deed will start having serious conversations. Hey, we raised $1 million, or we raised $500,000, right? Here we are taking open discussions. What parking lots do we want to invest in? And we'll have a formal decision-making process democratically as a community on how to do that. But to me, I think in order to do that properly, it's a slow process. It takes time. You have to, like I said, you have to crawl before you walk. And a lot of the organizations I see are aiming maybe too high up front and not looking at a long-term solution, you can tell by the business model, this isn't something we're trying to fly by night, flip some tokens and make $50.
So I think the interesting thing though is that's part of the thing is a lot of people that are getting in this space early do not have business experience. And so what they're doing is they're raising a ton of money with this crazy idea of like, I'm going to create the next shopping mall in the metaverse, even though it's not something that may be even possible right now. The thing though is once they get the money, I don't think they fully understand how to actually then create a business or have business experience, or even have anyone who has business experience that's even a part of the project. And I think that's what we've seen this last year is, and what I've continued to hear, which I think the big change is coming, where, like you mentioned, now people are saying, okay, let me actually take this slow. I want to create this company. I want to prove out the model first, because people are more weary now to just throw their money. Like the last year, people were just throwing their money left and right everywhere. Investors are investing in things. Sometimes it's almost mind blowing that someone even invested into that idea, because that idea now has not actually come to fruition, even with the money. Mm-hmm. So I think your model makes sense in what people are doing, and they're utilizing the DAO, like you said. So that's good to hear that. It's not all about let me raise as much money as humanly possible when I have no idea actually how to then implement, which to me, almost seems dangerous, and it's creating a lot of bad press. It's creating a lot of people that, they don't want to invest into things in these industries anymore because of that.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's really well said. I hate to use this term, but I think we'd all be lying if we didn't know that people that are new to DAOs, new to NFTs, not familiar with smart contracts, DAOs and NFTs are almost getting this stigma of scammy. And if you log onto Twitter and you see pages and pages of cats with rainbows, and people flipping their coins, and that's fine. I agree, digital art has its place, but there's more to it, and to your point, some of those other applications where we're tying blockchain to the physical world, and trying to do things in the physical environment. To your point, it's not a business yet. That's not what I've seen. I haven't seen much of the opportunity to actually grow an organization, or what I've seen is people so broadly describing their business that when you really take a second to think about it, right? How does a decentralized organization run something like that? Or for instance, starting a whole city, and buying a whole city is an example. How practical is that going to actually be in when we actually put rubber to the pavement? You have to be determined, right? But there's a reason that, and depending on where you fall on this, it could be sad to hear, but there's a reason that the largest corporations in the world run still efficiently, because they do have a central decision-making power. We're trying to avoid that, right? We don't want the resources and the benefits of parked out upstream to one person. That's the antithesis of why we created it. But the reality stands that when you have a single or a few sources of decision-making, that it's quicker, it is more efficient. So when you start thinking about that reality from a business management standpoint, you start thinking about how are these very complex ideas going to actually function, and is it going to be practical? To your point, it's going to require a lot of business management skills. It's going to require a lot of community organization, and it remains to be seen which one of these ideas can work and can't work.
Bradley, I'm curious, where did you register your DAO?
State of Wyoming.
Okay. When it comes to the voting rights to its member, now, does that matter whoever has the most token? Can you vote like 10 times like body because you have more token than someone that has $100 compared to a member that invested $1 million? What is that like in your own DAO? The DAO that you're created.
Well, I will admit, Kate, that's not been decided yet. And ultimately, that's something we will want to pose to the community to a certain degree and receive input. And we've had a lot of discussions already about it as a board. There's a few ways you can look at it. You can do it straight democratically, but then you stand the risk of someone coming in and buying a large majority of tokens, and obviously having some sort of overweighted input on how the organizations run, right? So one example is you could have, regardless of asset ownership, a 10% max cap vote, right? Or max weight. There's options like that. Or, you can ultimately, to answer your question very specifically, 51% over 50% will decide decisions at Park DAO. That's the intent. To be reading between the lines though, Kate, the concern is that someone buys a majority of our asset, makes a decision, hey, we're going to sell the parking lots. I have 51%. Park DAO is fun, thanks. that does need to be thought out, and there's ways to approach it. I think the most popular decision so far has been some sort of net weighted vote cap, right? Like I gave the 10% example, maybe it's 5%, who knows, right? And that includes the board members as well. There is another decision where, you could have ultimate board approval over certain things when it comes to the decision of like selling the company. We could write into the operating documents of the business that some decision to divest needs to be also voted on by the operating board, as an example, right? And we intend to have opportunities for regular members to join the operating board. So decision making is tough. Ultimately, it's going to be based on a majority, but there's got to be safeguards in place as well. And I could make that decision in a vacuum, right? I could decide what it's going to be right now on a phone call or on a piece of paper. But again, we want it to be democratic. So as we were trying to get input by people that are committed to being the community, the board, and trying to come up with the right solution.
No,
well, Kate,
I'm kind of curious. Yes, go ahead, Dan.
Oh no, I was going to say that's that topic has come up a lot. There was a company, a fairly very popular company that may have launched a DAO recently, and the big red flag was that there's also some very large investors that may even be related to this application who purchased a very large amount into that company, which now they would hold the largest weight, which kind of takes away from decentralization. I think there's that fear where you have these VC investors specifically, they're investing billions and billions. I mean, I couldn't even believe, how much money is being thrown around, but they're now going to have majority, which kind of, reminds me of like a stock, which is the whole opposite of decentralization, right? So it'll be fascinating to see, will the community dictate, will people dictate what they want, or will, like you mentioned, will it just become, what things have already, Web 1, Web 2, the whole history, will it actually change, I guess is my point.
I mean, the whole metaverse as a whole, we're seeing monies, billions of dollars pouring into who's going to be the first flag in the moon, right? Because you want to control whatever you want to do. That's not even the whole concept of the whole metaverse, right. But we're seeing it now as companies pouring money to be the first. I'm not sure if that's really a media play to be the first, right? I think that's majority of companies are doing that because they want to have, a bragging rights. Okay, we started this X, Y, and Z. I think majority of projects are like that, a gamble. But then let's see how it's going to play out. But Bradley, I'm kind of curious, getting into this complicated creating a DAO, what advice would you give for someone who's planning or thinking of creating something like this, not necessarily in the parking lot? I'm seeing projects where people are buying golf course, not even a golf course, but a membership where they get funded $11 million. $11 million. That's crazy. And I know there was some project that they're trying to acquire an island, but it did not go through. I don't know what happened, but if you're someone who's trying to buy an island, I do have an island for sale, not for me, but someone trying to sell it to me. But it's fascinating to me, and I'm curious. I know you're still in the early stage, right? What advice would you give? I'm sure you put a lot of hours and hours putting this together, creating the balance of what works and pitching in a very complex world business a model. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to create a DAO?
Great question, Kate. Really good question. The first and foremost thing I would say is to start slow. There is tons of VC money pouring into the DAO world right now, and it is really important what you said, Daniel, about the idea of someone, for instance, you can make the wrong decision very easily in this world, right? You could forget the idea of that someone could come in and buy 51% of your DAO and dissolve it overnight. You can forget the idea that you should probably get incorporated as an LLC if it's an option. And you can comb over a lot of these details. There's a lot of details. And you could make a mistake and be one of these companies that fail fast, And so I think that is ultimately the thing that I've observed, and the board has observed, is a lot of these have failed. And that's what our learning lesson has been so far. And what we're trying to do differently is to take it slow, if we hear something, if we get advice from legal, if we get advice from one of our developers, someone in our community, we want to hear that. We want to talk to people who have maybe words of advice for us. Like I said, it's a complex world. There's no way of denying that. And I'm learning things every minute that I'm trying to start this as an entrepreneur with the other group. But it requires something, especially when you're talking about the idea of huge amounts of money, right? These aren't small investments that people are making. I'm a steward of these people's money. I'm not a CEO, but I am a steward of it. So it requires attention and it requires time and to make sure you're doing it right. Otherwise, someone's going to find a way to manipulate your code or do a 51% attack or any other loophole that could come up. So that's my big thing is take it slow, make sure you're covering your bases and receive input from everyone you can to make sure you don't have those risk points, because there is so many risk points when you get into the weeds and start really looking at what it takes. That's my overarching advice for anyone. I think as we yes. Great question, Deborah. Thank you for asking it. And I appreciate, obviously, your understanding of the importance of taking some of these things into consideration. Ultimately, I don't want to overstate how far we are on our roadmap. We're really in the awareness phase, right? We have the LLC incorporated, and to, I guess, answer your question, what are we doing to walk the walk as far as protecting our own butts, if you will? The LLC is the first and foremost thing that we did, right? That's step number one. Incorporate, engage with legal, understand the risk points, and then proceed from there and reevaluating continuously what our risk points are. There's tons on the development side, on the smart contract side, on the promotion side, on the legal side, what you can and can't say, because along with legal protections of an LLC, Deborah, you also have risks, right? You can't claim things that are not true. And when you're representing a company, there's legal ramifications for things like that. So we're walking the walk as much as we can, but we are early. So when it comes to things like verifying our code and really taking that next step, we're trying to incorporate it as much as we can in everything we do. But ultimately, we're still, I'd say, close to a year away from when we do our full token and equity raise yet. So more and more will come up every day. There's no question. And I sure hope we can mitigate as many of those risk points as we can. I hope that answers your question.
All right. Go ahead. Thank you so much. I know we're doing live. Are we gonna do some Q&A in a bit? We're just gonna wait a little bit because we have some audience that we're doing in live. We want to make sure that it makes sense for our live audience. But Dan, go ahead.
Because they cannot hear people on Clubhouse, so they'll just hear silence. So I appreciate that. I think this is really good. So essentially today we've been talking through all different things. Like I mentioned before, we had Dr. Billy in here before, who really works on regulations for the European Blockchain Alliance or European Blockchain Association. And today we wanted to have somebody who recently created a DAO, to talk through the beginning phases, right? So we know you're not the expert in all things DAO because you just got started, but I think this is great being able to hear from someone who's done a lot of research, who finally created the process. So people here can learn, if I want to start something, this is what I should be looking at. This is what I should be doing. So we appreciate you being here. Somebody did ask about different software. Do you have any recommendations? I know there's a whole bunch like Aragon, there's DAO Stack, DAO House, Colony. Do you have any recommendations for any software that you're using to either manage the DAO or manage the process in the creation?
Yeah, really great question. Two of those names you mentioned, I will say we're looking into. I don't want to get specific and over promote someone. To be honest with you, we are, and we're looking at everything. Any solution we can. But two of those names you mentioned specifically, we're considering incorporating. There's also a new startup as well that's approached us who has a similar type of solution that is looking for. This is an interesting thing about this community too that these people that our group may appreciate is they're looking to collaborate and build clout, so to speak, right? So they're hoping that we could be a pilot customer of theirs. They've had a couple use cases that have been implemented, but think of ParkDAO as a really good opportunity for them to showcase their software solution. So it's a similar competitor to the ones you named as an example, Daniel, but we are going to have to heavily rely on that sort of solution. No question. And then it's going to be a combination of using one of those solutions. Thankfully, our CTO is in programming and writes code. We do have a data scientist on our board who does do coding and programming. So it's not exactly aligned with writing on Ethereum code, right? But it is enough where one of those solutions is really beneficial and can really get us where we need to go, coupled with the idea of some sort of peer review, definitely, right? And that's a big part of it, is having constant peer review, constantly getting more eyes on the code to mitigate risk points. It's not enough to just use a code and publish it, because we're responsible for that code. Some of those software solutions, it seems great. You put in your smart contract, you put in the parameters of what you have in mind, you publish it, but you're liable if there's mistakes there. So we're starting with some of those solutions, and then long term, as we grow and put the long term smart contract ready to sell tokens, ultimately, we intend on having peer review in as much ways as we can.
Excellent. I'm going to read a message here. I appreciate that. We have Mitch Jackson. He's an incredible attorney here. He actually he said that you're talking about a lot of great things, and that he has some really good information too. So check out Mitch Jackson below. He's an incredible attorney. He did say this, and I love this. Just you want to be careful if you do fail often and fail fast, because that could be a recipe for bankruptcy. But so I do appreciate that, Mitch. But I did like what you're saying earlier, though, Brad, about how you have, these companies like the one who was trying to get the Constitution that are going for these really, really big hits. So I'm really curious to see in the future, some of these DAOs that maybe start much smaller, that are maybe, branching off as an extension of their current organization. That's what we are hearing a lot of now, where somebody already has a company and they're creating a DAO as an extension of their company, maybe to create something, a little bit of a smaller part or a separate organization. So, we also had interviewed Path DAO, where they have thousands of players, a guild from around the world, but they strategically place their DAO in a completely different country because they're actually based in Malaysia. So I wonder how is the DAO structure going to be different from if it's based in the US, if it's based in the Caribbean, or if it's even based in Asia. I wonder if they're going to structurally be different. So those are some thoughts I'm thinking through.
Well, I can. That is interesting. I hadn't heard of Path DAO. I'll take a look at them. Yeah, I'm glad you keyed in on the idea of starting small, because the only way we could grow to owning $50 million parking structures is by proving to people that the idea of autonomously running a parking lot actually works. If I went out today and said, hey, we're going to buy a parking structure in downtown LA, it's the same thing as trying to buy a blimp. You don't even know if your organization works. And what happens if you don't raise that? It's a huge amount of resources, and it's just too complex. Whereas we can raise X amount of dollars, right, and have a floor that's much lower, and prove anywhere from a $100,000 parking lot to a $2 million parking lot, whatever it is, right? We're yet to determine what our floor will be, and we're open to input there. But once we set that floor, then we intend to go to the community and decide, hey, do we want to buy this one parking space in New York City? It costs $10,000. We can do that just to prove we can do it, right? Or if we raise $1 million, then obviously we have a lot more to consider. But the floor can be very, very low in proving that as a community, we can put a deed on the blockchain. And that's what we're ultimately trying to prove up front is, can we put a deed on the blockchain? And once we do that, then we can start growing to larger and more assets. So that's kind of our strategy to start, crawl before we run. Buy something small or big. I don't know, whatever the community raises, whether it's $100,000 or 10 million, but the community will decide, and then make sure that works. Once that works, then we can look at parking lot 2 and 5 and 10.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for that. So before we go to Q&A, because we have to stop the live here, where can people, find more about it or connect with you?
www.parkdao.net, which is PARKDAO.net. That's really the best place to land and find all of our socials. We're on all socials though, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook. We have a Discord you guys can find us at. If you land on the webpage though, that'll get you everywhere you need to be. And ultimately, I would recommend, if you guys feel compelled, you want to join our community, please go to the contact page there and sign up for emails. We're going to be sending out, updates as we go and receiving input. And we even have opportunities for joining the board and working as a partner to help promote. And there's benefits that we envision for those type of engagements too. So get connected. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Bradley, I'd like to invite you again as you're moving along with your DAO. I'm very curious, the balance of how you're going to make everyone happy and what works financially, and the economics and happiness of the community, have that balance and what makes sense for the company as a whole. It's one thing, it's already hard to run a company when you have structures and it already has a blueprint. It's another thing to go into a war where you don't have a compass of where to go. So I'd like to, again, as you're there, I'd like to get some updates and some learnings because we all need to hear it.
Would love to. I'll keep you guys informed and would love to come back and continue